All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we have a very interesting stream, at least in my opinion. It's one of our historical analysis. And shout out to Attila for sponsoring today's stream, in which we're going to be covering the life and legacy of one of my favorite saints, Saint Alfred the Great, the king of the Anglo-Saxons, arguably the force that would lead to a unified England 2 generations later by his grandson. And so we're going to be discussing a little bit about his life, why he is such an important historical figure, and the immense tumultuous time in which he lived in trying to defeat the Danes and the Vikings in their conquest over England at that time. Of course, England wasn't England. England was a series of different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, of which he comes from the kings of Wessex. And we'll discuss a little bit. There's a lot to get into today. So again, it's going to be a bit of a historical adventure that we're going to be going on. But King Alfred is great for multiple reasons. And King Alfred is arguably one of the greatest Christian kings of all history. I put him up there with Justinian and St. Theodosius. And, you know, he's often kind of contrasted or compared with Charlemagne. And Charlemagne obviously was the king of the Franks and what became the Holy Roman Empire, the false Roman Empire, since we're Orthodox, but I digress. And St. Alfred the Great certainly didn't have the influence across the continent like Charlemagne had, but there are many similarities and many differences. But some of the qualities that are unique to St. Alfred the Great is his piety. He was an incredibly devout Christian man. And because of that, he revitalized monasticism among the British Isles. And he also brought learning, higher learning back to England. There's a famous quote, and we're going to cover all this as we move through today, that he lamented the fact that how few and far between there were learned men in England at that time due to all the ransacking. So when the Vikings or the Danes coming from Denmark, the Norse coming from Norway, all of which are considered Vikings, when they would come, their priority was often to find a monastery because gold, important relics, important monetary items would be found at these monasteries. And so they would ransack monasteries. And during the medieval period, monasteries were the centers of higher learning. And so unfortunately, because of this, St. Alfred felt like higher learned monastic men were few and far between. And so one of his priorities, once he was able to establish some side of peace after the Battle of Edington, the Battle of Edington in 871, he becomes king in 871. Edington is 878. This was ginormous. So in 878, when he finally defeats Guthrum, one of the Danish Vikings, he forcibly, upon the treaty, and we're going to get into the whole building up to this battle. And in fact, I'm really excited because I'm going to try to. Now, this comes from a YouTube channel that has a million subscribers, so I may have to not play the whole thing in its entirety, but clips is show you some of these important battles that King Alfred was in. And so not only was he pious, he was a philosopher king. Now, his biographer, Bishop Asser, states that he didn't fully learn how to read until the age of 12, but he had an incredible memory. And there's a story that Bishop Asser describes in the biography of King Alfred that his mother had this book of poems, and she wanted to give it to one of the children. Now, King Alfred had 3 older brothers, I believe, 5 siblings in total. although he is the youngest of all of them. And so the eldest brother had already died, from my understanding, before Alfred was even born. And we'll get into some of the real interesting happenings with the, I guess, second eldest son, who tries to usurp his father upon a trip to Rome with King Alfred. We'll discuss that here in a bit. But King Alfred was apparently, according to this legend, had a great memory, and he wanted this book that his mother had. And so he went to a tutor of some sort, although he couldn't read. This is before the age of 8. And he memorized the book and recanted it back to his mother to show her that he knew the book and he could read, although according to his biography, he wasn't fully able to read until the age of 12. Now, unlike Charlemagne, who, from my understanding, never was able to read, although the Carolingian Renaissance and the promotion of learning and the higher arts is sort of central to the Carolingian Renaissance and the legacy of Charlemagne, St. Alfred did learn to read, and he pursued it all of his life. He became fluent. Obviously, he could read Old English, and he became fluent in Latin. And in the latter half of his life, especially the last decade of his life, he was incredibly interested in translating text. And we're going to cover this, that there's about 4 books that he himself translated. Now, according to contemporary scholars, there's legends of multiple other books that he is said to translate that they sort of raise higher criticism towards. But we know for a handful that he actually did. And one of them was from Pope Gregory the Great, his, what was that book called? I'll pull it up here in a second. It was it was, let me see real quick. It was the Pastoral Care text by Pope Gregory the Great. And it talks about the necessity of clergy being literate, how they should pursue higher sort of intellectual faculties like philosophy and theology. And so King Alfred actually translated this himself in the latter half of his life and distributed it. His intention was to distribute it to all clergy and all bishops in England so that they could understand what the goal of Christendom was. And so he really revitalized the monastic life in England. He revitalized higher learning. Another important thing is his military reforms. So as we'll get into, England was being ransacked, or at least these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. You had Wessex, you had Sussex, you had Essex, you had East Anglia, you had Northumbria, you had Mercia. You had all these different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, which had their own king. But with the incursion of the Viking raids beginning in like Northumbria, the Anglo-Saxons were constantly defeated. And so they typically at that period they didn't have necessarily standing militaries per se. Once a threat arrived, they would recruit men from the country to then form arms and go to battle against the Vikings. Well, after one of the military reforms, but especially after the defeat of Guthrum, this Viking that he forcibly converted to Christianity after his defeat, along with 26 other Vikings, the 26 sort of higher men under Guthrum, they all were forced to convert to Christianity after the defeat by Alfred the Great. And Alfred the Great became the personal godfather to Guthrum. And according to history, Guthrum, though he sort of reneged on multiple oaths and treaties with Alfred, did uphold this one, and according to history, did stay as a Christian the rest of his life. But Alfred the Great actually formed a standing military. So once he, especially as King of Wessex, and especially after the Battle of Edington, he actually created a professional military so that men would be on guard because he knew that the Vikings were going to come back. And so it's reported that he had up to 20,000 soldiers, which maybe to you guys doesn't sound like much, but at the time in the medieval period, that was a really large military. And he had to raise taxes so that he could afford this military, but it was essential in the success that King Alfred had later in his life in defending Wessex and his kingdom from the Vikings. So very interesting stuff. He also created these burhs, which is related to the word burrows, where he would build um, sort of defensible structures throughout his empire or his kingdom there in Wessex, so that when the Vikings came, he told the people, flee to these sections. They would be garrisoned by his standing military, and that they would be able to defend themselves against the Vikings. And these turned out to be incredibly successful because they could mobilize the military that he created, and they could be anywhere within his kingdom within a day. And so this really hampered the Viking incursions. And again, this was due to the reforms that King Alfred made. Another one, and this is kind of a legend, there's been a legend that King Alfred is the sort of progenitor and the source of British naval power. Now, not quite, because Wessex and his father they already had a sort of standing navy at that time. Wessex did, but it is true that Alfred grew the importance of naval supremacy, which is going to reiterate throughout British history, because obviously their naval dominance is essential to the East Indies Company and British history and colonialism and all that different stuff. But Alfred, again, later in his life, constantly learning philosophy and theology and anything that he could get his hands on, he actually personally designed, along with some of the learned men of his court, new boats, new ships to defeat the Vikings. Now, these were much bigger. This was actually a 60-oar-man ship. But back then, again, medieval naval wars were not full of cannons and stuff like this. It was really about the transportation of soldiers and creating sort of like quote unquote land battles in water. And so because the ships that Alfred designed were so much bigger and heavier, now they weren't as maneuverable and agile as the Viking ships, which had such it set so high in the water that it could get through estuaries and rivers, and they could basically go wherever there was standing water, the Vikings could get to. But when it was out in the sea or in the English Channel, because his ships were so much bigger, I mean, they would totally dominate these Vikings. And so he wanted to, whenever there was going to be an incursion, he wanted to meet them out in the ocean after building these ships, and they had multiple successful defeats. So Alfred the Great, I got 5 points on why I believe he's great, but the lots of different things we're going to get into. So major thank you again to Attila for sponsoring today's stream. Shout out to you, Attila. God bless, brother. Father John Whiteford said, when it was suggested that Winston Churchill was the greatest Englishman in history, Churchill said that could only be Alfred the Great. Yeah. It's funny you say that, John Whiteford, because I was looking up there's a list that was made. When was it? Let me see real quick. In 2002, there was a list of the 100 greatest Britons of all time. And of course, Winston Churchill was number 1 on that list, and Alfred the Great isn't till 14. So the contemporary British magazine, I forget which one it was. This was a UK wide vote. So it shows you how much the British people have sort of lost their grasp of history. Winston Churchill was number 1, but John Lennon was in the top 10. John Lennon was considered more important to British history by the UK people in 2002 than Alfred the Great. And even Winston Churchill, if anybody knows their history, look at how his life after World War II, he was basically ousted. And much of the government didn't want much to do with him. So, very interesting. But, one of the things that I couldn't get over in regards to doing research is how Alfred the Great is really the beginning of what becomes England. And he is the first one to actually defeat the Vikings. I mean, England was going to speak Scandinavian if it wasn't for Alfred the Great. And he viewed the Viking incursions as a sort of punishment from God, because England had lost its monastic community. It had lost its piety. It had lost its morality in his eyes. And so he viewed the Vikings as really God's wrath on them. And the only way to stop it for Alfred the Great was to create a strong Christendom within England. And so you see then the expansion of Wessex after Danelaw. If you're not familiar, we're going to get into all this stuff today. But you look at modern day England, and it's really not, I mean, it's not hard to see the reversal of everything that Alfred the Great created. The loss of piety, the new invasion, if you will, from various migrant communities, the loss of their faith, the loss of their morality, just like America, right? Promoting all the LGBTQ degeneracy and whatnot. And so it's kind of sad to see the current state of the UK and then look back to, again, as I've talked about before, my ancestry, according to my mom's lineage, which they have an actual family book, the furthest they can trace their family is to the Anglo-Saxon invasion of then Britain. And so I do come from the Anglo-Saxons. And then my dad, the furthest we can trace there is the Norman invasion. And so that's what, 1066 in England. So I'm very English and Irish, my family history. But both the Normans, who obviously are the Norsemen from Norway, so those are Vikings that eventually take over part of northern France. And then, you know, the Battle of Hastings is when William the Conqueror takes over. But, you know, Alfred the Great, one of the things that I appreciate is I have an Orthodox saint that is of my people, that is of a country that, again, my ancestors came from, that is such a great role model and man of history. And preparing for this stream, it made me think I should do a series of great men of history and kind of do their life, their legacy, their biography and such like that, just so that more of us can see great men of history. You know, not only was Alfred the Great a learned man, a pious man, a moral man, an honest man, he fought in battles. He was plagued by health problems his whole life, and yet he led multiple battles. And one of them, you know, that we're going to be talking about is the Battle of Ashdown. This was a battle in which his older brother, so the Alfred's the youngest, the one eldest above him, they were the last remaining sons of his father. And at the Battle of Ashdown, they defeat the Vikings. And the Vikings divided their powers. And I'm going to show you this battle. We're going to see a little overview of it. They're coming to the battlefield, and Alfred the Great has already deployed his troops, and they're ready for battle. His brother, who's actually the King of Wessex at that time, was, again, they come from a very pious family. From all historical records, his grandfather, his father, and certainly Alfred the Great's mother, these were all very pious Christian people. That his brother was actually receiving the Eucharist. He was in a liturgical service in one of his military tents, and he would not run out to battle until he received the body and blood of Christ. Alfred the Great at that point saw that the Vikings were already deployed and ready to come on the battlefield, and he launched into battle, being dwarfed in numbers, totally outnumbered, and was able to have a very strong showing against the I guess that would be the right side of the Viking line. And as the Vikings came around to sort of pin him down, that's when his brother finally showed up. And so bravery, courage, these things are essential attributes when we cover Alfred the Great. I mean, imagine going to battle against the Vikings, of which the entirety of the Anglo-Saxons had been conquered at that time. Only Wessex was standing a defense. And you go into battle with basically half the military because your brother, he's over here at liturgy in a tent receiving the body and blood, and you go out and you actually kind of stop. And he didn't defeat, because it wasn't until his brother came to the battlefield that he was able to sort of surround the Vikings who were trying to surround Alfred. So when we think about Alfred, we're thinking a man of courage, a man that fought in battles, a man that was incredibly pious, a man that carried, according to his biographer, and his biographer, Bishop Asser, says that he saw it personally. He had a little notebook that he would write prayers and psalms in, and he carried it around his entire life. And he said that Alfred was inseparable from this book, that even when he was hiding in the marshes, after one of the surprise attacks the Vikings had on him on the 12th night of Christmas, Alfred had dismissed the military. He let them go home to their families for Christmas service. And the Vikings, knowing that the Christians were going to celebrate Christmas, actually planned a surprise attack, of which many people died, and only Alfred and a handful of men were able to escape. And he basically hid out in the marshes for the next 6 months as he was sending out letters and trying to gather all the men of Wessex to battle, of which they eventually show up, and that leads to the ultimate defeat, the Battle of Edington in 878. So just a really incredible man. And so when we look at Alfred's life, we're going to see from the 860s to really 878, that's the Battle of Edington, a lot of military incursions. And then after 878, the 880s into the 890s, Alfred dies in 899. So he only lived 50 years old. That's what's so amazing when we look at our own lives in the contemporary world, how much this man was able to do in 50 years, right? We're talking about him in 2024. We're talking about him over 1,000 years after he lived. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing. Like somebody said in the chat before the stream started, they don't make men like they used to. And rightfully so. It's true. We are so conditioned by our comforts and our pleasures in contemporary life that the courage, the grit, the tenacity of some of these men of history, I think they're idols and they're men that we should look up to. So that's what we're going to get into today. We got tons to dive into. So smash that like, guys. Before we dive into everything, I want to say thank you again to Attila for sponsoring today's stream. Really appreciate you, brother. And if you would like to also sponsor a stream, you can do so with this link right here. We have a stream. The next one coming up will be Father Spirit and Bailey's book, The UFO Deception. Then we'll actually be doing a stream that's kind of be touching on today's stream. We'll be doing an overview of all the British Orthodox saints. And so what's interesting is, the Catholic Church did not canonize Alfred till much, much later. And so it was, I think in 2000, when was it? 2000 or so, that the Russian Orthodox Church canonized Alfred the Great and all the supposed great men of. Now, Alfred is the only great king of England. He's the only one with the epithet the Great. But, like St. Patrick of Ireland, all these were canonized and brought into the Orthodox Church officially through the Rocor. I forget which year that was. It was 20th or 21st century, so fairly recent. But anyways, I digress. The next sponsored stream will be covering many of the British saints that are Orthodox saints. And then we have one sort of deconstructing the Church of Christ. We have one of our brothers, 2007. Thank you, King Attila. So it was 2007 that Rocor brought Alfred the Great into the Orthodox Church. And so he is a saint, and he's venerated on the day that he died, which is October 28th. So if you, I know some people already said that Alfred the Great, I think it was Alfred right here of New England, said that Saint Alfred the Great is his personal saint. So his Christian name comes from him. So a great man of history, no doubt about that. So if you have another stream that you would like to sponsor, feel free to do so with that link right there. Also, guys, we got new exclusive video content over at the website. As you can see, the most recent video is a very juicy one that is certainly maybe not as suitable for the TOS here on YouTube, but it's Khazars in the history of Ukraine. And so it dives into a little bit about the history of Khazaria and its relationship to Ukraine, and even bringing it up to the contemporary conflicts we're seeing. So if you'd like to have access to this exclusive video content over here, sign up as a member. It's only $5 a month, but if you want access to the fitness meetings as well as the premium members think tank meetings, you can do so there. If you purchase a year subscription, you get 2 months free. So check that out if you guys are interested. And if anybody wants to sign up for a one-on-one session, we can dive into any topic your heart desires, be it theology or philosophy or new age spirituality or fitness, whatever it is. You can also purchase a one-on-one session. We'll get into a private Zoom meeting and do all that. Also, guys, we got merchandise over at the shop. If you want to get yourself a t-shirt, we got multiple different designs over there. And Last but not least, if you guys are in the market for any Orthodox items, check out orthodoxdepot.com. Orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL. You'll get 10% off all items. They have icons, prayer robes, incense lamps, whatever it is that you may be looking for. Some t-shirts. Although if you're going to get t-shirts, get them from my website. No, I'm kidding. But use promo code COTEL and you'll get 10% off. It's a great way to help me out, as well as a good Orthodox company right here in the Midwest, United States. So you go to check out orthodoxdepot.com, use promo code COTEL. All right. So with that being said, guys, we have a lot to get into today. Let's see. I have multiple articles. I found multiple articles from Orthodox blogs and Orthodox Christian websites about Alfred the Great. I got here. Let me just show you everything that I want to present to you guys. Let me pull this up. So, here's a quick little overview that I think is really good, and it provides visual representation. We're going to read through this. Here is Orthodox Wiki, and it talks about Alfred the Great, highlighting the importance of the right-believing King Alfred the Great. Again, he's a saint, at least in Rocor, and I know other jurisdictions as well, but I'm not sure the full extent. And his feast day is October 26th. I'm sorry, not the 28th, October 26th, the day that he died. But one of the things that I want to show you guys, this is a quick little overview, this video of who Alfred is. But what I'm really excited, what I personally love to watch, and I tell you guys, I'm obsessed with watching these videos, but hopefully we can present a little bit of it to you, is the Battle of Ashdown, how exactly these things unfold. Looking at, Alfred and his brother, and how they defeated the Vikings. And that's going to move into the most important battle, the Battle of Edington right here. And so I hope to show you guys a little bit of that. I also have the war song, or the honorific song of Alfred the Great in Old English. It's really interesting. It has, as we click through here, you'll see that on the bottom, you can read the translation from Old English into contemporary English. And then I found a hymn that it's when the enemy comes in, King Alfred's war song. And this is a Christian hymn dedicated to Alfred the Great that is in English. So I was going to play that for you guys as well. And, here's a little bit of a map. So when we start talking about these various kingdoms and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, we're going to be focusing on Wessex. So down here at the bottom, southern England. The Isle of Wight is actually where King Alfred's mother is from. She comes from a noble family. But Wessex is the place in which he himself was king, and his grandfather was, his father was, his eldest brother, his second eldest brother, his third eldest brother, and then eventually him. So King Alfred was the youngest, and therefore not necessarily ever envisioned to be the actual king. But due to, again, fate and the death of many of his elder brothers, it was just him and his one eldest brother, who then eventually dies in 871. And this then leads to, and despite his eldest brother having two sons, it's King Alfred. They made a personal agreement that when he died, King Alfred would take reign over England in Wessex, and thank God that he did. So just to look here, these were the different kingdoms. You had Northumbria, you had Mercia, you had East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Wessex. And then, of course, you had Wales and all the various Celtic groups. But, we're going to dive into all this stuff. So to begin, just because there's so many dates, and I want you guys to kind of wrap your head around everything. Maybe we'll begin with this introductory video. And because I got a whole timeline, I got tons of stuff that I wrote out for today's stream, but just articulating history, I think, can get a little bit confusing. So let's check out this video first on who was Alfred the Great, and then we're going to dive into more details and stuff from there.
In 847 AD, in the Kingdom of Wessex, an Anglo-Saxon prince named Alfred, later Alfred the Great, was born. But first, what is an Anglo-Saxon? Well, by about 50 AD, England and Wales have been incorporated into the Roman Empire, but due to the small problem that they were being invaded by just about everyone, Rome left the British Isles around the year 400, never to return. Britain's native peoples, the Britons, a term which describes a whole bunch of similar, though certainly distinct.
Major thank you to Austin DeTulio for the 5 gifted COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, Austin. Really appreciate that, my brother. Just now saw that you did that. Thank you very much. Also, if you guys want to support as we move through this stream, if you have comments, questions, or just want to show some love for the research, feel free to send in super chats using Dono Chat or the Streamlabs link. Or if you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. And if you're really feeling generous, like Austin, give some COTEL Crew memberships. I know everybody in the chat really appreciates those. So thank you again, Austin. God bless you, brother.
People groups, but we'll use the broad term Britons for simplicity.
And so look right here. Remember we did a whole thing on the Celtic peoples. We did a stream on the Celts, a history over the Celts. We did a stream on St. Patrick of Ireland. Remember how we talked about the way that the Celts looked and that they had this bright white blonde hair that they would sort of spike up. They would draw blue sort of artistic depictions all over their skin. They would go to battle shirtless without armor, just a shield and a sword or an axe of some sort. And so we see that exact same thing here. So this is depicting the British Isles before the Anglo-Saxons, the Celtic peoples. If you remember that stream, and if you're not familiar, you can go back and check out our history of the Celtic peoples. It breaks up into various different groups. So just wanted to throw that in. Oh, and thank you so much. Logan Daly just gifted 10 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, Logan Daly. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate that generous offering. Thank you very much, Logan Daly. God bless you, brother. Okay.
Simplicity's sake, were suddenly free to rule themselves, though the power vacuum left by Rome's absence made them a tempting and fairly easy target for anyone looking to seize land and glory for themselves. And that is where the Anglo-Saxons come in. The Angles and Saxons were 2 Germanic people groups native to northern Germany and southern Denmark, who migrated to Britain in the 5th and 6th centuries and eventually drove the Britons out of everywhere bar Wales. The period from the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons to the year 927 is usually referred to as the Heptarchy, meaning rule by 7, because of the 7 major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that ruled England at that time. Though keep in mind that as one gets closer to the year 927, more and more of those kingdoms were absorbed into others. Also, in
927 is when the grandson of Alfred the Great actually conquers the last remaining Viking stronghold here in Northumbria, the yellow section here, and creates what we know as history as England, the first united England.
793, the monastery of Lindisfarne in Northumbria was raided by Scandinavians, Vikings, beginning the Viking Age and drastically changing the dynamics of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. So, to come back to Alfred the Great, in the year 865, his elder brother Ethelred became King of Wessex, which now looked like this, and Alfred entered public life for the first time as his designated successor.
Now, what it's not telling you is, and let me pull up his brothers real quick, that when Alfred was about 6 years old or so, he actually went with his father to Rome. Here we go. So his older brothers, Ethelbald and Ethelbert, and then Ethelred. Ethelred's the one that the video we're watching just discussed. So Ethelred was the one elder brother than Alfred, right? So technically there's 4 boys, but actually Ethelwulf, his father, had another son before these 4, and it's debated by historians whether that was from a different woman or not. Anyways, the mother that Alfred had 4 boys and 1 daughter. And Ethelbald, when his father Ethelwulf and Alfred went to Rome, upon their arrival back to Wessex, Ethelbald had acquired power with various nobles there in Wessex and claimed that he himself was now king of Wessex over his own father, Ethelwulf. Ethelwulf, because he loved his sons, they didn't fight it out. They had some type of agreement, and Ethelbald would control the western territories of Wessex, and Ethelwulf, the actual father and actual king of Wessex, would control the eastern portions of places like Kent. And so, unfortunately, Ethelbald dies. Ethelbert then comes into power. Ethelbert dies. And now Ethelred is king of Wessex, the elder brother of Alfred, and they're the only two brothers left under Ethelwulf. And his sister was married to one of the noblemen of Mercia at this point, and they eventually flee to Rome after the Vikings take control over Mercia. But again, I don't know if that's in this video or not. But anyway, I was just trying to give you context for where we're at right here.
Incidentally, unlike in traditional royal succession, Ethelred succeeded not his father, but his elder brother, who himself had been preceded by another brother. This was allowed because under West Saxon law...
So Ethelwulf, father, Ethelbald, oldest brother, Ethelbert, second oldest brother, then Ethelred, and he dies in 871, eventually bringing Alfred to the throne. And I just want to give another shout out. Thank you so much, Logan Daly, for renewing his membership. He says, Celts mentioned. Absolutely. Shout out to all the Celts. I got a little bit of Irish ancestry as well. So I'm very English, Anglo-Saxon, Norman, Irish. But anyways, let's continue here.
Succession was not guaranteed by birth order, and a council of West Saxon nobles ultimately decided which royal would become the new king. It's for this reason that the adult Alfred was made Ethelred's successor and not the king's own young son. Also in 865, a Danish force, the Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia, whose king probably gave them horses in exchange for short-lived peace. We don't know the exact size of the Great Heathen Army, but it was much larger than any Viking raiding party that had came before it, because this time the Northmen had come to England not just to take wealth, but to conquer the now 4 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms: Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, and of course, Wessex. By 868, Northumbria and East Anglia had both fallen to the Vikings, and under the leadership of the warrior king Ivar the Boneless, they were making incursions into Wessex's neighbor and ally, Mercia.
Now, remember, again, the Great Heathen Army, okay? So they're talking about 865. 865, what's referred to as the Great Heathen Army. So, again, right here we can see a quick map. Mercia, Northumbria. So the Great Heathen Army comes in 865, but unlike previous times in which the Vikings raided England or Britain at this point, they came with the purpose to conquer. They wanted to take over the entire land themselves and control it. And so, unfortunately, as you're getting ready to see, all these other kingdoms, all these other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms eventually fall to the Vikings. The Vikings are in a very strong spot. And it isn't until Ethelred and Alfred actually fight back that there's a little glimmer of hope. And so, just want to highlight here the Great Heathen Army. If you guys aren't familiar, again, Scandinavian warriors who invaded England in 865, and their raids. Had been engaging raids in centers of wealth such as monasteries. The Great Heathen Army was much larger and aimed to conquer and occupy the 4 kingdoms of East Anglia, Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex. The name the Great Heathen Army is derived from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, where, again, some of the history and legends of Alfred comes from. The force was led by 3 of the 5 sons of the semi-legendary Ragnar Lodbrok, including Halfdan Ragnarsson, Ivar the Boneless, and Ubba. Ivar the Boneless, that's who's just now being mentioned in the little video we're watching. The campaign of invasion and conquest against the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms lasted 14 years. Surviving sources give no firm indication of its numbers, but it was described as amongst the largest forces of its kind. So imagine that. The one group of people who have plagued your people for history and which you basically have no answer for. There's a handful of battles in which the Anglo-Saxons won. And some historians argue that the reason the Great Heathen Army came is because the sons were upset that their father actually lost a battle in Northumbria, and the king of Northumbria, the Anglo-Saxon king, threw him into a pit full of snakes in which he eventually died. And so to take revenge on the Anglo-Saxons, this is why the Great Heathen Army came with the now purpose of full conquest, as opposed to just ransacking the monasteries and taking as much booty and wealth that they could. So just wanted to give more context there.
The king, Ethelred, accompanied by Alfred, rode out to defend Mercia from the Danes, but by December 870, the invaders had reached Wessex itself. The West Saxons and the Vikings fought a series of engagements across Wessex, notably the Siege and then Battle of Reading on January 4th, the Battle of Basing on January 22nd, and the Battle of Merton on the 22nd of March. All three were Viking victories. Interestingly, the leader of the Vikings invading Wessex was a man called Halfdan or Ragnarsson, the brother of Ivar the Boneless. According to legend, they in particular, as well as several other brothers, were motivated to invade England because their father, Ragnar Lothbrok, the king of Denmark and Sweden, had been thrown into a pit of snakes by Aella, the king of Northumbria, after a failed raid on England. In April 871, Ethelred died, possibly from injuries sustained at the Battle of Merton. He was succeeded by Alfred, who promptly lost to the Vikings again in May, but he wouldn't lose to them again. Instead, Alfred paid off the Danes in exchange for peace. So did the Mercians the next year, but by 878, the Vikings had invaded again and took control of the kingdom. The rest of Anglo-Saxon England was also firmly within the influence of Viking lords, the most powerful of whom was the new king of East Anglia, Guthrum. In 876, he invaded.
And Guthrum, right here, is the Viking that eventually Alfred the Great will defeat in battle and will force him to convert to Christianity, of which Alfred the Great becomes his official godfather. So right here was the king of East Anglia in the late 9th century, the late 800s. Originally of native Denmark, he was one of the leaders of the Great Summer Army that arrived in Reading during the April of 871 to join forces with the Great Heathen Army, whose intentions were to conquer the kingdoms of the Anglo-Saxon England. The combined armies were successful in conquering the kingdoms East Anglia, Northumbria, and parts of Mercia, and overran Alfred the Great's Wessex, but were ultimately defeated by Alfred at the Battle of Edington, which we're going to get to. I'm going to show you that battle in 878. The Danes retreated to their stronghold where Alfred laid siege, and eventually Guthrum surrendered. Under the terms of his surrender, Guthrum was obliged to be baptized as a Christian to endorse the agreement and then leave Wessex, which according he did. He never came back, although there were still Viking incursions. We'll get into that. The subsequent treaty of Alfred and Guthrum set out the boundaries between Alfred and Guthrum's territory, as well as agreements on peaceful trade and the weregild value of its people. This treaty was seen as the foundation of the Dane law, which we'll get into. The Dane law is the territories in which the Vikings controlled until the grandson of, well, the son of Alfred, Edward the Elder, and then his son are the ones that eventually defeat the Vikings totally and get them to leave England. But Guthrum ruled East Anglia under his baptismal name Ethelstan until his death. So even as he returned back to be the king of East Anglia, he retained the Christian name that Alfred the Great gave him personally.
Invaded Wessex, but Alfred's forces managed to hold him off. In 878, Guthrum invaded Wessex again, this time pushing Alfred south into the marches of Somerset. But a few weeks after Easter, Alfred managed to raise an army, and he defeated Guthrum at the Battle of Edington in early May. With it clear that neither side could effectively defeat the other, the two men agreed to a peace treaty that would formally be signed in 886. It split England between Alfred's Wessex, which received half of Mercia, and the Danelaw, a loose union of Viking kingdoms led by Guthrum, which ruled the rest of the country. Importantly, Mercia was not annexed into Wessex, but it did cease to be a kingdom. Instead, it became subject to Alfred, and the new lord of Mercia married Alfred's daughter, Ethelflaed. Around this time, Alfred also began to call himself king of the Anglo-Saxons as a whole, not just king of Wessex. So, with peace mostly secure, Alfred set about reforming his kingdom. At his heart, he was more of an intellectual than a warrior. But before he could focus on improving any of his subjects' lives, he first had to make sure that the Vikings weren't going to come back and take them. The most impactful of Alfred's reforms was the creation of the burh system. The burhs were more than 30 fortified settlements built across Wessex and Mercia that made it so no one within Alfred's realm was more than a day's ride from the security of strong walls and soldiers.
And so you can see the Southwark over here by London on the right side of the page. This burh was essential for actually the recapturing of London, and many historians credit Alfred the Great in his recapturing of London and then the minting of coins and stuff in London for the growth of London as essentially the central city of England as history moves forward. At this point, London really wasn't that great of a city, and once the Romans left England, London actually was uninhabited for like 100 years or so. So Alfred the Great, later in his life, this is in the 890s, really builds London up to be what will become the historical London that we know.
They also served as markets for England's primarily rural population, and later as locations for England's royal mints. Each burh was given a value which determined how many soldiers it was expected to provide both for its own defense and to serve the king in times of war. This value, denoted as a hide, fluctuated over time, and what exactly the value of one hide was at any given time isn't always 100% clear. For example, if one hide was worth roughly one fully armed soldier, then Alfred's army would have consisted of some 20,000 men, a staggering amount for that time. But if 5 hides were worth one soldier, his army would have been close to 5,500 men strong, a much more reasonable figure. Regardless, the burhs combined.
And I just want to say, upon my research, I saw, again, difference of opinions among historians, but some actually believe that it was around 20-some thousand soldiers that Alfred, essentially, he collected more tax. This caused a little bit of rife with some of his citizens, but he raised taxes so that they could build basically a professional standing army. So Wessex and the Anglo-Saxons would always have soldiers ready to defend. And all those burhs that you saw, those red dots across that map, were garrisoned by this professional army. So to get enough men that whenever the Vikings came, they would be able to respond quickly. Alfred had to raise taxes, but this was one of the reasons why after the Battle of Edington, they were so successful in defeating the Vikings, is because of this burh system and because of the professional army that he created.
With 2 other reforms of Alfred's, the creation of England's first standing army and a naval buildup, made defense of his lands considerably easier, and when much of the great heathen army returned in 892, they were held off and eventually repulsed. Back at his core, Alfred focused on turning his kingdom into a center for scholarship. He believed that Viking raids on monasteries, medieval Europe's most important intellectual organizations, had left England lacking learned men, and so he invited many of Europe's brightest minds, including St. Grimbold and the monk Asa, to join his court. To some extent, he was right, but the existence of scholarly works from Mercia from around that time, as well as Asa, who was from Wales, the princes of which had recently sworn fealty to Alfred, have created debate among some historians as to exactly how much Viking raids affected learning in Britain. Alfred himself was undoubtedly intelligent, though. He spoke both Anglo-Saxon and Latin, had a penchant for English poetry, and unlike most European kings, he encouraged teaching to be done in the common language, English, rather.
And he also made liturgical reforms. So unlike Charlemagne and unlike all the kings of the continent of Europe, Alfred actually wanted people to learn about the faith in their vernacular. So you could say, again, a very orthodox perspective on the utilization of language and ritual, Christian liturgy. So Alfred wanted the liturgy to actually be done in English as opposed to everything in Latin. Now, I don't know how far that and how successful that was, but he was a great progenitor of the promotion of the English language. And this is why he translated in the Alfredian Renaissance, translated so many Christian and philosophical texts into English so that people could read them in their vernacular.
Rather than Latin. It was during Alfred's reign that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which documents English history from the arrival of Rome to well past the Norman conquest, courtesy of later writers, was written. It serves as one of our main sources of Anglo-Saxon history. In his personal life, Alfred was married to a Mercian noblewoman named Ealhswith, with whom he had 3 daughters and 2 sons, including Ethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, and Alfred's successor, Edward the Elder. He is described by Asa in The Life of Alfred as more comely in appearance than his brothers and more pleasing in manner, speech, and behavior, and in spite of all the demands of present life, it has been the desire for wisdom, more than anything else, together with the nobility of his birth, which have characterized the nature of his noble mind. Admittedly, though, Alfred was paying Asa, so draw your own conclusions. Alfred died in 899 of unknown causes, though he likely suffered from Crohn's disease and hemorrhoids for all his life. Alfred the Great was never given that epithet during his life. It was ascribed to him by writers during the Protestant Reformation, who saw him as an example of a king uncorrupted by the Catholic Church.
However, so that is obviously 16th century, the Protestant Reformation's 1517. But the utilization of the epithet Alfred the Great or the Great was already in common use by the 13th century. So by the 1200s, the people of England were already referring to King Alfred as the Great, the only king of English-born ancestry or born in England to ever receive that title. So yes, it became more popular after the 16th century, but it was already in use by the 13th century. That's according to my research.
And he also wasn't the first monarch to claim rulership over all England. In fact, his domain wasn't even the largest up to that time, but as king of the Anglo-Saxons, he ensured that England, or at least the parts he did control, would be safe from Vikings and would remain intellectually vibrant, at least for the Middle Ages. The House of Wessex, which he headed, would, from his treaty with Guthrum onwards, rule progressively larger parts of England until his grandson Ethelstan fully united the kingdom in 927. Hey look, you made it to the end of the...
Okay, so now you have a quick little overview of everything that I was trying to describe earlier. So I hope it makes a little bit more sense. I know the map, most people aren't going to be familiar with the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of England, but now I want to read a few little notes that I put together in regards to Alfred the Great, so you guys can kind of get a sense of everything. I wrote a document out, so let me read some of this stuff to you guys. So, as I said, Alfred the Great was born in 489 in Wantage in the Kingdom of Wessex during the time of significant turmoil and conflict in England. The Vikings, primarily of Denmark, so the Danes, had been conducting raids since the 8th century, so the 700s. Of which his grandfather was greatly successful. And his grandfather actually conquered much of what his Alfred the Great's grandson would do to create modern-day England, although he lost it relatively quickly and just sort of consolidated the Kingdom of Wessex. The characteristics of St. Alfred the Great, these are some of the ones that I wrote of why he's a memorable king. Number one was his military leadership. Alfred is renowned for his military acumen. And some, again, as you heard in that video, he was plagued with health problems throughout his whole life. And apparently, according to one story, when he was a young child, he went to Ireland and went to a monastery and prayed for healing. And he prayed to God that, I'm not sure what the ailment was. Nobody knows for certain what exactly it was, but it was troublesome so much that he prayed to God that he would give him a different ailment in return so that he would be of use to his father in the Kingdom of Wessex, of which he claims that God answered. And so whatever ailment he was ailed with as a child, this in one way or another was alleviated after his visit to this monastery in Ireland. And he was plagued with, again, as he mentioned, various other ailments, but he was a great, great military leader and still fought in battle. So he wasn't one of these kings that were just too good, to join his men in battle. He would lead them in battle. He is recognized. He recognized the military, creating a network of fortified towns, the burhs, which we just covered, and a standing army that could quickly respond to any invasion, something I've already discussed. His legal reforms. So Alfred's noted for his legal reforms, and he codified a legal system that blended Mosaic law, Christian principles, and traditional Germanic customs. This code was known as Alfred's Doom Book, laid the foundation for English common law. And this is one of the, again, historical reverberations of his reign, is his legal reforms. And according to his family's ancestry, they claimed that they were descendants of Adam, again, trying to provide some sort of biblical reinforcement to who they viewed themselves as and who they viewed themselves as rulers and kings of Wessex. Next one was his educational reforms. Alfred was a passionate advocate of education, as we've talked about. He was he desired to be a learned man throughout his entire life. And he was a passionate advocate of education. He invited scholars to his court and promoted literacy and learning, especially in English, which was novel at the time, because much on the continent, all education and learning was done in Latin, where within the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms under Alfred the Great, he wanted it done in English so people had it in their own vernacular. He personally translated several important works from Latin to Old English, making them accessible to his people. We'll read some of those. That was Boethius's book on philosophy, and Pope Gregory the Great's book on pastoral care. And his religious devotion, this is why he's venerated as a saint within our church, is that he was a devout Christian his entire life. And there's a quote from him that I don't know if we'll be able to see. I think it's in the video covering the battles. He had a prayer which he told God that, again, essentially he viewed the Viking incursions as the wrath of God due to the lack of piety and the lack of upholding the Christian faith of the Anglo-Saxon peoples. And he basically said, no matter what happens, I will devote myself to defending the Christian faith, and, destiny will fall into place afterwards. And as we saw, he eventually defeated the Vikings, and again, why he's so renowned. So he was a devout Christian, and he intertwined his learning a lot. So he loved to read theology and Christian philosophy. He supported the church. He reformed monasteries. So as we talked about with all these Viking incursions, they were ransacking monasteries. Monastic life in England at that time was very little. And so he personally revitalized that, especially after the Battle of Edington, and emphasized a moral and religious education for all the nobles and even for poor people. So if there was a young man who was born poor, but he had some type of intelligent acumen, Alfred wanted him to be taught in the sort of private noble courts that he created, so that if somebody was actually intellectually gifted, they would be given the resources to be able to further their education and become teachers in their own right using the English language. Major thank you to Amptown 1. Sister, thank you so much. She just gifted 5 COTEL crew memberships. Thank you very much, Amptown. Really appreciate that, sister. God bless you. And shout out to Mud, who just gifted a COTEL crew membership as well. Thank you very much, Mud. Thank you very much, Amptown 1. Really appreciate all your support, sister. God bless you and your family. Hope your mother's doing well. So just wanted to say that. The importance of Wessex. During Alfred's reign, Wessex emerged as the leading Anglo-Saxon kingdom, primarily due to its ability to withstand and repel Viking invasion. So let me pull up my map here, just so you guys can have a map for everything. Where is that? Here we go. So here's a map of a few of the kingdoms. So Wessex was the most important of these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Alfred... anyways, the kingdom's geographical position in the south of England made it the last stronghold against Viking forces that had conquered much of the east and west. Battle against the Vikings, Wessex faced severe Viking threats, especially from the Great Heathen Army, a coalition of Norse warriors who we discussed. And then we're going to get into the Battle of Edington, but there's a few things I want to lead up to that. So that occurred in 878, and that was led by that Guthrum Dane gentleman, who again eventually is defeated and forced to convert to Christianity. He launched a surprise attack on Alfred's court at Chippenham, forcing him to hide in the marshes at Athelney. And so this is an amazing little story that I found as well. So there's a few different legends associated with Alfred the Great during this time in which he was sort of out in the marshlands hiding from the Vikings. I told you that the Vikings knew that the Christians were going to be celebrating Christmas. So they had a surprise attack on Chippenham. And when they went there, only Alfred and a handful of men were able to escape with their lives. And so he hid out in the marshlands. And there's a story about the baking of bread, right? Some of you guys are probably going to be familiar with this. Maybe not. But there's a legend in which Alfred was under disguise. So people didn't know that he was the king of Wessex because he was on the run and he didn't want anybody to notify the Vikings where he was. So a regular woman and her husband allowed King Alfred to stay with them, and she had to go do something, and she asked King Alfred to watch over the bread. Being so sort of inundated with everything that was going on in his life, King Alfred was caught up with his thoughts, and the bread got burned. And the woman came and just scolded Alfred, and he never once raised his voice. He didn't respond to her, and he never told her that he was actually her king. And so this was a story, whether true or false, this is reported by his biographer, to kind of symbolize the humility of King Alfred, that, you know, some regular woman, a pleb, if you will, was scolding him because he let her bread burn, and yet he never reprimanded her or told him who he was. Another fascinating story that, again, is legend. We don't know for sure, but during this period in which he was hiding out in the marshlands of Somerset, which would be, again, right around here. If you guys can see my mouse on the screen, it's right around here on the southwestern section between Exeter and Bath, are some of these swamplands that he went under in disguise and went to the Viking stronghold, of which he went there. And apparently King Alfred was a great singer, according to this legend. And he began to sing songs and enamor all the Vikings. And he was doing this to sort of gain intel on their plans, where they're going to attack, how they live, stuff like this. And so the number one outlaw, the King of Wessex, was undercover, went to the stronghold of the Vikings, according to this legend, sang songs, enamored the Vikings, and they actually paid him. They wanted him to come back to sing more songs another night, of which he left and went back to his marshland stronghold in Athelney. And so did that happen or not? We don't know. But again, it symbolizes the courage and bravery of King Alfred. Some of the accomplishments, as we said, the military reforms, the naval innovations, the legal reforms, educational advancement, religious reforms, and cultural patronage. Under Alfred's reign, Wessex became the center of learning and culture. His support for the arts and education laying the groundwork for the flowering of Anglo-Saxon culture in subsequent generations. Now, another interesting tidbit about Alfred the Great is that the belief of, treason as... so treason being written into law and that you are punishable by death actually comes from Alfred the Great. So after he became king, because during these battles, many of the people of his court would actually turn sides and go and support the Vikings because they thought the Vikings were going to win. So to save their own butt, they sided with the Vikings over their own people. Well, Alfred the Great turned it into law that if anybody was to take a pledge to the king and not uphold that duty, they were essentially subject to treason and they were subject to death. So we can kind of point back to the role of treason within sort of legal history to Alfred the Great. Now, is he the first one? Probably not. But many historians have noted of the importance of his legal reform in placing treason or treachery or anybody who disobeyed their pledge to the king as potentially punishable by death, depending on what they did. So I got a few more things here. To give a full timeline, I wrote down a whole timeline. I don't want to, again, bore you guys with all these historical facts or whatnot. But for those that are interested, keep in mind, we're in the 9th century, the 800s. 849, King Alfred is born. 853, so this is when he's about 4 to 5 years old. He travels with his dad, Ethelwulf, to Rome, where he is there's a legend that, again, this is a historical misrepresentation. They say that he was already sort of crowned as the future king of Wessex. Not the case. He had 3 older brothers. He was kind of just given an honorary title by the Pope at that time because many believed that he would never become king. At 858, the death of his father Ethelwulf, his elder brother Ethelbald and Ethelbert and Ethelred subsequently became the kings of Wessex. In 865, this is what the arrival of the great heathen army. And 868 is Alfred's marriage to Elswith, who is also a saint of the Orthodox Church. His wife was incredibly pious. So his wife is also venerated as a saint, and she actually built a monastery dedicated to the Theotokos after the death of Alfred the Great in honor of his monastic reforms. So his wife, and she lived a life of chastity and piety after his death. In 871, we have the Battle of Ashdown. Alfred, alongside his brother King Ethelred, defeated the Viking forces. However, this year was marked by several battles with the Vikings winning. Now, I want to turn to the Battle of Ashdown, which is right here. So this is a large YouTube channel. It's got over 1 million. So I assume this is copyrighted, so we'll just have to play segments. I turned it up to 1.5. So if he's speaking fast, it's so that we can catch more of the video within a single minute or so as we click through here. So what he's describing, so this is 871, the Battle of Ashdown. Now, before this battle, this is the siege of Reading. So the Vikings had already the Vikings had already taken the city of Reading, and Alfred and his brother showed up, and they were going to set up camp and go to battle the next day. Well, unfortunately, the Vikings were not waiting for the next day, so they came out and attacked right away once they saw the Anglo-Saxon forces aligning, and this caught the Anglo-Saxons off guard, and so they eventually fled. So this was a rout, essentially, the siege or battle of Reading. And this leads forth, so things weren't looking good, and this leads to the next battle, the Battle of Ashdown, which symbolizes Alfred's immense courage riding out to battle while his brother is still at divine liturgy taking the Eucharist. So check this out.
The invaders had divided their numbers into two main divisions, one under the direct command of Halfdan and Bagsec, the second under the remaining Jarls. Mirroring this, King Ethelred retained command of one division of his army, while Alfred commanded the other. Asser writes that Alfred had initially been tasked with taking on the Jarls division, while the king would contend with Halfdan and Bagsec's. Despite these well-laid plans, however, Alfred had not reckoned on his brother's piety, and while marching to close on his opposing division, Ethelred remained in his tent hearing mass, declaring that he would not forsake divine service for that of men, and would not leave alive before the priest was done. Having decided to engage his Viking foes regardless, Asser writes that, acting courageously like a wild boar, and with God's help, Alfred pressed on regardless. His division formed into the tight shield wall. The enemy possessed the higher ground, though, as Asser points out, Alfred's warriors were spurred on to fight for their lands, loved ones, and their very lives. The battle raged, Asser assures us, around a small and solitary thorn tree, the Saxon and Viking lines clashing to and fro for many hours. As for the delaying Ethelred, his mass concluded, he too joined the battle after Alfred had already engaged with both heathen divisions. This dimension of the battle is somewhat arguable. Asser is a good source, yet firmly Alfred's man, and likely to play down his elder brother's role to the benefit of his hero. It's entirely possible that the delay was deliberate. However, whatever the case, Ethelred's intervention arguably turned the tide. During the frenzied melee, Bagsec himself was slain, along with 5 Jarls. Halfdan survived the day, ordering his warriors to retreat back to Reading. Asser states that many were slain into the night, though the battle failed to utterly destroy the Viking force.
So that was, again, the Battle of Ashdown, and symbolizing the courage and bravery of Alfred the Great. I just want to make sure before we move on, Alfred of New England, shout out to Alfred of New England, throws in $2 over on the Streamlabs. Thank you very much, Alfred of New England. He said, great to see some love for my patron saint. Greetings from NH. I assume that's New Hampshire. So thank you very much, Alfred of New England. Really appreciate that, brother. And let me just double check the dono chat. We have one from Justin Henley, throws in $5, no comment. Thank you very much, Justin Henley. Really appreciate that. So anyways, guys, I love these battles. And so I want to play some of this for you guys, but obviously I assume this is copyrighted, so we can only do a few clips here and there. But let me play. So there's only, about a minute and a half left of this video. We'll play the rest of this, and then I want to move into this one, the Battle of Edington. So 878. So this is 7 years later after the Battle of Ashdown, in which him and his brother defeated the Vikings. But of course, there's all these different events that occur, and many of the Vikings actually won various small battles. But moving back to my timeline, so that was 871, the Battle of Ashdown. In 871, his brother dies. So Ethelred dies. Alfred becomes king of Wessex in 871, following the death of his brother. And so as king in 876, the Viking raids then continued again. Despite a truce, the Vikings broke their agreement, capturing Warehelm and later Exeter, but Alfred managed to force them to retreat. And so I would like to, if I think that's on here. Oh, here we go. So here's some of this. So I'm going to catch. So Alfred defeats some of the Vikings at sea with his new ships and his naval power. Now, one of the unique historical facts here is that Guthrum, the Danish Viking, he actually swore a pact. So this was, I think, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, one of the only times in their history that this happens, is that the Anglo-Saxon Alfred the Great, the king, he allowed the Vikings to make a pact on the Ring of Thor, dedicating this pact to Thor, of which they immediately renounced right afterwards. And that's what I'm getting ready to show you right here.
That year or earlier in the next, Guthrum's army made its move. Alfred had not been negligent of the danger, as is indicated by timing of the invasion. West Saxon scouts had long observed the enemy camp. However, Guthrum ordered the advance into Wessex during the night, and given Alfred's swift mustering of the feared to resist them, the arrival at Wareham was impressive. Guthrum's occupation of Wareham must have been both a shock and humiliation to Alfred and his army. Around 140 miles from Cambridge, Guthrum thus successfully avoided direct confrontation, riding through the heart of Alfred's domain, and now occupying this important royal centre. Yet as audacious as this was, Alfred could have been forgiven a moment of confused amusement, as now his enemy was battled up deep within his own heartland and far from overland supply. However, appearances were deceptive, as news soon trickled in that a large Viking fleet had been sighted off the south coast. With the scales balanced so, Alfred once again turned to negotiation to rid Wessex of his foe. As in 871, an agreement was reached that Guthrum would leave the kingdom, the usual hostages exchanged, and the deal sealed with an unusual pledge of faith. Whereas before the heathens had sworn upon Christian relics, this time Guthrum swore upon his own people's holy ring. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, this was something never before conceded to any folk. Another source, Ethelwerd, suggests a more unbalanced arrangement in which payment was once again offered to encourage their departure. Whatever hopes Alfred may have had following the talks, though, they were shattered at the news of Guthrum's swift betrayal. Instead of marching back to East Anglia or Mercia, the enemy moved by night west to Exeter. The ancient walled city provided further shelter to the invading army, but may also have presented a greater threat, still, given Guthrum could potentially link up with disaffected Cornishmen to the west. The Cornish were certainly no friends of the House of Egbert, their father suffering defeat at Hingston Down decades before. Certainly a new Viking-Cornish alliance was not entirely unthinkable. Whatever Guthrum's plans, however, Fortune's wheel now scuppered them. His fleet setting out from Poole Harbour had been smashed to bits in a storm of truly biblical proportions. Barely a few miles into their voyage, a great storm struck the 120-strong fleet near Swanage, with a loss of all hands. At a stroke, Guthrum's leverage vanished. Encircling.
So I just want to pause for a second, just so we don't get a copyright claim or anything on this video. So I think that should be good.
Exeter, an enraged Alfred, now reassured he was in the right, now had Guthrum over the metaphorical barrel. The Chronicle reports that Guthrum conceded as many hostages as Alfred demanded, and specifically men of enough import to deter another reneging of their agreement. So, by the summer of 877, Guthrum and his army finally retired from Wessex. At Gloucester, within Ceolwulf's Mercia, Guthrum activated the previous arrangement agreed after Repton. Part of the kingdom would remain under Ceolwulf, with Gloucester itself and the east distributed among Guthrum's men. This cultural and legal splitting of the ancient Middle Kingdom would endure for centuries, Watling Street effectively setting the Danelaw boundary in the immediate future. Back south, Alfred may have thinly hoped the dismantling of Mercia had satisfied Guthrum, but if so, he was to be brutally corrected.
And so what they're getting ready to talk about now is Guthrum's reneging again on another agreement they have, and they're getting ready to surprise St. Alfred at Chippenham during the Christmas celebration. And this is where he just barely escapes with his life with a few other men, and they hide out in the marshes of southwestern Wessex.
Previously, though negotiations had eventually forced Guthrum's withdrawal from Exeter, the heathen leader had been in no great hurry to depart, his occupation lasting several months, and it's entirely possible that during this period, Guthrum entertained the more disaffected elements of Alfred's subjects. After Christmas of 877, Alfred had survived as the last remaining free king of Anglo-Saxon England through a mix of grit, bribery, and good fortune. However, where brute force alone had failed him in the past, Guthrum also now employed deception to oust the last free king. Alfred's payments to the enemy, while expedient and, in the short term, effective, also inevitably alienated some of the Witan, upon whom the burden would fall to provide payment. Events came to a head at Chippenham, which Guthrum, with his characteristic stealth, fell upon during the 12th night Christmas celebrations. By the time of the attack, Alfred and his closest followers had fled. As it is later recorded that Alfred survived alone for some months, we can assume no support sufficient for the king to immediately muster the feared in response to Guthrum's attack. Asser himself describes Alfred's state of existence following Chippenham. King Alfred, with his small band of nobles, and also with certain soldiers and thanes, was leading a restless life in great distress amid the woody and marshy places of Somerset. He had nothing to live on except what he could forage by frequent raids, either secretly or openly, from the Vikings, as well as from the Christians who had submitted to the Vikings' authority. Whether or not treachery in the West Saxon court was afoot, the result was undoubtedly the same. With Alfred and his few remaining followers fleeing from Guthrum, the entirety of Wessex was now at the pagan warlord's feet.
And so now we're going to skip forward to the Battle of Edington. So this is again 878. So Alfred hides in the marshes for months. Some say around 6 months or so, sending out letters to other nobles and other men around the Wessex kingdom to garner soldiers so that they can fight back. And so Guthrum had this plan, because they kind of knew that he was somewhere in this area, that he was going to have a Viking raid come in on this north side of the southwest part of Wessex, and they were going to meet. Guthrum was going to come from one direction, and then Ubba, the other Viking Dane, was going to come from another direction, and basically encircle Alfred, force him to surrender, and then essentially take over all of England, would be under Viking domination. And so I'm going to fast forward to the battle that really shifted the spirit of the Wessex people.
Ubba, the brother of Halfdan, would sail from southern Wales to land behind Alfred's position, while Guthrum himself closed the trap from land. It was a decent plan, but had not reckoned on the actions of one who had remained loyal to his king. Otter, the ealdorman of Devon, had rallied his men to the defense of Wessex in the previous weeks and settled his force at the stronghold of Kinwit. Ubba, with his fleet of 23 ships and around 1,200 men, landed nearby and set about encircling Otter. Apparently convinced the Saxons would be forced into surrender given the lack of water on the hill, Otter nonetheless gave every impression of hunkering in for the siege. In truth, the ealdorman had a simple plan. In the distance below, perhaps he saw the Raven banner, bold and menacing in the breeze. As Halfdan's warriors had done to his lord at Reading, so Otter would sally down in a surprise attack. His target was that banner and the person of Ubba himself. So it was that Otter's charge smashed into Ubba's ranks, and indeed around 800 of the invaders' army lay dead. Ubba himself was among the slain, and now the sacred Raven banner was in the hands of one of Alfred's loyal ealdormen. The slaying of Ubba, last son of Ragnar, must have chilled the hearts of Guthrum and his host, while inspiring those of Alfred and his men. It must have been an unambiguous beacon to arms for the battered loyalists of Wessex. If not before, perhaps more and more messages of support began to flood into the Alfredian camp, and as winter gave way to spring, it would be Alfred who struck the next blow. Asser writes that around the 4th to the 10th of May, Alfred rode to King Egbert's stone on the eastern end of Selwood. Alfred would be forgiven for holding his breath as he approached the mustering point. Could such a reversal in support from the betrayal of Chippenham be possible? Greeting him as in answer were some 4,000 men of Hampshire, Wiltshire, and Somerset, all who had answered the call. Camping at Selwood for a night, Alfred moved to Ely the next day, the location of another well-known gathering point. Perhaps Alfred meant to bolster his army further. Guthrum himself marched to intercept him at a place called Edington. As with Ashdown several years before, the exact location of one of the more important battles of English history is not known for sure. Whether at Edington Hill or Bratton Camp itself, Guthrum awaited Alfred's onslaught. Frustratingly, Asser skimps on the specific details of the action that day, though he writes, Alfred moved his forces and came to a place called Edington, and fighting fiercely with a compact shield wall against the entire Viking army, he persevered resolutely for a long time. At length he gained the victory through God's will. Though describing battles of this period as long-lasting is quite typical, we have no solid reason to doubt this. If Guthrum's warriors held the ground advantage, but the field had that of numbers, the fight could easily have devolved into an hours-long slugging match. The fighting then was likely long and hard, the two tightly knit shield walls hacking away at each, the scrum of sword, shield, and muscle shifting to and fro, until finally chinks began to fracture Guthrum's line, and the momentum decidedly shifted into Alfred's favor. With his warriors faltering or simply determining that defeat was certain, Guthrum must have decided to call a general retreat. But the melee of battle swung decisively to the West Saxons is plain. Asser writing, Alfred destroyed the Vikings with great slaughter and pursued those who fled as far as the stronghold, hacking them down. The aforementioned lines imply much damage was inflicted before the general flight, and without the death of Guthrum himself, we can assume a major breach in the line or a severe drop in morale that preceded the collapse. Though inflicting heavy casualties before pursuit, Alfred mercilessly hunted the remnants to the very gates of Chippenham itself. Alfred's wrath may have been understandable. For months he had been a fugitive in his own lands, perhaps forced to flee by treachery from within the ranks of his own great men, and had now snatched victory from the very precipice of defeat. Fortune's wheel now revolved full circle. Surrounding Guthrum's remaining men within Chippenham, the West Saxons killed any man caught outside, and seized all goods and animals in the vicinity. Encamping at Guthrum's doorstep, Alfred settled down, content to wait for either the surrender or starvation of his foes within. 2 weeks into their ordeal, Guthrum finally accepted defeat. Unlike earlier encounters, there would be no negotiation or talk of hostage exchange. Guthrum alone would yield what hostages the king demanded and would receive not a single coin in payment. In addition, Alfred required Guthrum and his leading men to convert to the Christian faith.
And so with there, I want to read a little bit about what happens after this battle. So let's see here. King at war, early struggles, 880s. So counter victory and attack. This is what we're reading right here. And then Alfred won the decisive victory at the ensuing Battle of Edington, which we just watched, which may have been fought near Westbury, Wiltshire. He then pursued the Danes to their stronghold at Chippenham, which is again where he was when he had to flee on that the celebration of Christmas. And he, as we saw, they sieged Chippenham and forced the Vikings to surrender due to the lack of any sort of food or goods. So they were literally getting ready to die from starvation. And they then conceded. 3 weeks later, the Danish king and 29 of his chief men were baptized at Alfred's court at Aller near Athelney, with Alfred receiving Guthrum as his spiritual son. According to Asser, so the biographer that was hired by the bishop Asser from a Welsh bishop, Welsh Christian man, said the unbinding of the chrism on the 8th day took place at a royal estate called Wedmore. At Wedmore, Alfred and Guthrum negotiated what some historians have called the Treaty of Wedmore, but it was more to be some years after the cessation of hostilities that a formal treaty was signed. Now, it doesn't say here, this is Wikipedia, but they did have actually Wikipedia was actually one of the better overall overviews of some of the important sections. But according to one historian that I read, Guthrum actually stayed with Alfred for up to 10 days. Learning about the Christian faith, educating Guthrum in Christian ethics and morals and theology, and actually giving gifts to Guthrum for his conversion to Christianity and being his godson. So I thought that was really interesting. It wasn't just like a one-time thing where they brought the Vikings in, they baptized them, they left. Apparently they were there for over a week, and King Alfred was personally educating Guthrum in various aspects of the faith and life and such. I thought that was pretty interesting. So they create what's called the Treaty of Wedmore. And then the treaty divided up the kingdom of Mercia. By its terms, the boundary between Alfred and Guthrum's kingdoms was to run up the river Thames and the river Lea, follow the Lea to its source, and from there extend to the Strait of Bedford, and from Bedford follow the river Ouse to Watling Street. So this is the division of Western Mercia, basically becoming part of Wessex, and Wessex also taking over part of the Mercian territory that controlled like London and Kent and these sections as well. All this was now under Alfred's control. And so Alfred succeeded to Ceolwulf's kingdom consisting of Western Mercia, and Guthrum incorporated the eastern part of Mercia into an enlarged kingdom of East Anglia, henceforth known as the Danelaw. We've talked about that. By terms of the treaty, moreover, Alfred was to have control over the Mercian city of London and its mints, at least for the time being. In 825, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle had recorded that people of Essex, Sussex, Kent, and Surrey surrendered to Egbert, Alfred's grandfather. So anyways, that's that. Now, I also have a few things that I wanted to share with you. This is the Old English song of Alfred the Great. I don't know if you guys want to hear that one now. And this is one of the Christian hymns to when the enemy comes in, is what it's called, King Alfred's War Song. So let me play this one. Since this one's in English, you guys will be able to understand it. But this is a Christian hymn dedicated to King Alfred. Okay. When the enemy comes in, by our very own Alfred the Great.
When the enemy comes in, roaring like a flood, coveting the kingdom and the hungering for blood, the Lord will raise a standard up and lead his people on. The Lord of hosts will go before, defeating every foe, defeating every foe. For the Lord is our defense, yea, to defend us. For the Lord is our defense, yea, to defend. Some may trust in chariots and some trust in the horse, but we will they were sent to love the name of Christ our Lord. So Lord, and take our hands to war your mind to testify. The Lord is of our enemies and raises us a cry. He raises us a cry. For the Lord is our defense, yea, to defend us. For the Lord is our defense, yea, to defend. Thousands fall at my left hand, and thousands to the right. He will defend us from the arrow in the night. Protect us from the terrors of the sheep that love devour. If you have stood us here, is Lord, encompass us with power. Encompass us with power. For the Lord is our defense, yea, to defend us. For the Lord is our defense, yea, to defend.
So I thought that was a little bit of a unique little add-on. Some of you guys were probably not familiar with that song. This is a contemporary English hymn dedicated to the victory of King Alfred over the Danes. And this is a historical song. This is in Old English. And so you'll have to read the bottom. Let me make this a little bit smaller so you can read the bottom a little bit better. And so you're not going to be able to understand the words. This is sung in Old English, but I thought it was a pretty cool song. And you can read the bottom because it's literally describing the whole battle. Everything that we've just learned about is being educated. If you knew Old English, you could listen to this song and you essentially be educated on this whole thing. So check this out.
West av Alfred könig, den denna. Ashdown, Anglo-Saxon blev han. Kom vi till hans herre, åldern bekurnes, stånda i överraget här, jag släger på där. Skynan laddate, nisha vi kängas, jag ska göra, han varna. Englisha tjej, kan man vara vatten ett jämka forna i vän, utanför faman nu går det. West av Alfred könig, vill denna. Uterskall kristen rom, vid handen under jern. Halsen herre bästa förbud, Kilden han tas på det örsat, mycket fast, kristnes folkets, översatt mat i bombarnorten, Alfred könig, av dig och god, fyllde vid källen, tomma sjön, kyrkornas hjälp, och att ni har fel, han är alltid byrjan, och av Alfred könig, vill denna. Uterskall könig, ankerkungens befall. Det lasten nästan under, tog om eder och planöppel, yrkat i ett barnets vall. Hundret av fäders skördar en andra, hymrat till, ge ett pallat, vår fäder, beskärande, det handelsir, evigt med dos. Triumfa undan från West-Saxon, West av Alfred könig, vill denna. Blodet dränkt vid källen, aror runt vid knä. Tidigare håret fall från en vall, vilket allt som heter gefylde, angetan, röden rätt ord, vindhållen motval. Valde och skilde, där mot Michel, antal i vall, gåvet och England stämde. Alfred könig, inför här, Jeshuan den och Luange. Sköt av Alfred könig, vill denna. Torde stigen över Genom hungervittnen ökat förfall att mitt sådär Gud från Gudning och fara och att det förbytte om både Gudning varom fäng att förbytte att fänga dig måste få vara underbryten da forsöker av West-Saxon Well, Alfred König ger denna Godheten lycklige denna frågan Oavsättningen hon gåve och kung Alla morgondagen fast hon mitt kära
So that's the Old English song, again, dedicated to St. Alfred the Great, and basically covers his whole life. It talks about, as you guys read on the bottom there, it talks about his visit to the Pope, his coming back to Wessex, his anointing as king, his defending of Christ, his putting his faith in Christ and defending Christendom, his defeat of the Vikings at Edington, his siege of surrounding them and starving them out at Chippenham, and then his conversion of Guthrum, and his life as king. So I thought that was again, I know I don't read it. It sounds like Attila. Shout out to Attila. He knows, he's fluent in Old English. I don't know any Old English, but I thought it was a good little historical point for our stream today. So I hope you guys like that. Now I want to cover more of like King Alfred's life after Edington. Obviously, the Battle of Edington is huge. But as we mentioned, in 880, it's the full establishment of Dane law, the separation of the territories of the Dane laws, the territories under Viking rule, and then obviously all the territories that then King Alfred controlled. In 886, he recaptures London. Alfred recaptured the fortified London, a significant strategic and symbolic victory, enhancing his prestige and influence. In 890, Asser's Life of King Alfred. Asser, a Welsh monk and close confidant, wrote a biography of Alfred, providing valuable insights into his life and reign. And then through 892 to 896. Now, remember, Alfred dies at the age of 50 at 899. He renewed Viking invasions from Denmark, tested Alfred's military reforms, those burrs, the professional military. And I don't know if I mentioned that standing army, which again, some historians debate, was it fully 20,000 or not? I think Attila mentioned it in the comments, and this is a fact. So he would move soldiers out. So half of the army would be able to go home. Half would be on duty garrisoning these burrs and being a professional standing army. And then they would go home, and the people that were home would come back. And that's how he was able to maintain a professional army at that time. So, and then, like I said, he dies in 899. And I was looking into, what were some of the similarities and differences between him and Charlemagne, and whether King Alfred ever had any contact with Byzantium. I was curious if this was the case. And so I did a little bit of a deep dive, trying to find any connection of King Alfred to the Byzantine Empire, or correspondences or letters or anything like that. And so I didn't find any concrete. So I wrote that there is no concrete evidence that Alfred had direct contact with the Byzantine Empire during Alfred's reign, although he did write to the Bishop of Jerusalem at that time, the Patriarch of Jerusalem. And so the Byzantine Empire was primarily focused on its own internal and external challenges in the 9th century, including conflicts with Muslim caliphates and internal political strife. The bishops that we do know that he was in contact with, these are the ones that was in his court, is number one, Asser, Bishop of Sherborne. He is a Welsh monk and scholar, and he was actually asked by Alfred. So when Alfred lamented the fact that there weren't many learned, educated men in England at the time, he asked Asser to come from Mercia and a handful of other Mercian monks to come to Wessex, be part of his personal court, and help him revitalize monasticism and learning in English. So Asser, he's the one that wrote the biography. He was a Welsh monk scholar who became Alfred's closest advisor. He wrote the life of King Alfred. his influence. Asser played a key role in Alfred's intellectual and religious pursuits, helping to promote education, scholarship in the court of Wessex. Pelgmund, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was an appointed Archbishop of Canterbury in 890 with King Alfred's support. Plegmund was an important religious figure who helped Alfred in his efforts to reform and strengthen the Church of England, although the Church in England, not of England, I'm sorry, the Church in England, because it was Orthodox. This is pre-schism. And then Grimbold, Abbot of St. Omer. He was a Frankish monk and scholar invited by King Alfred to England. So again, he even reached out to monks on the continent. He contributed to Alfred's educational reforms and helped in the translation of important texts into Old English. And then John the Old Saxon was a scholar brought to the continent by Alfred, and he assisted in Alfred's educational and religious reforms as well. So just wanted to highlight that. In regards to some of the comparison and contrasting of Charlemagne, I wrote a few things down, because Charlemagne is sort of the larger historical figure during this period, right? I mean, Charlemagne is kind of the historical figure during the 9th century, if you will, especially with his elevation to the king of the Western Holy Roman Empire. But some of the things that I wrote down was like military leadership, administrative reforms, educational and cultural patronage. Both of these men were a part of that. Differences as kings, the extent of rule. Charlemagne ruled a vast empire covering modern-day France, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and parts of Italy and Spain. So massive. Of course, he was coronated by the Pope as the king of the Holy Roman Empire in 800, symbolizing the revival of the Western Roman Empire. Alfred's kingdom is much smaller. The kingdom of Wessex and later extended influence over parts of Mercia and other regions. His realm was much smaller in comparison to Charlemagne's. Legacy and unification. Charlemagne's empire eventually fragmented after his death. If you're familiar with the Carolingian dynastic, Charlemagne gave parts of his kingdom. So he had a unified kingdom, and then he would give different subsections to his sons, which would divide it and actually cause historical problems, as you would imagine, where Alfred, he laid the groundwork for unification. So after Alfred, his kingdoms become more unified, eventually leading to England with Athelstan, his grandson. Charlemagne's becomes more and more fragmented. So I thought that was a unique difference in their regards to legacy and unification. Religious influence. Charlemagne worked closely with the Catholic Church, supported the spread of Christianity. Now, again, he believed that he wanted to promote the filioque to differentiate the Holy Roman Empire of the West from the Byzantine Empire. So this is why Charlemagne is certainly not a saint in our church, while St. Alfred is. St. Alfred laid the groundwork for the eventual unification of England. His descendants, particularly Edward the Elder and Athelstan, continued his work, leading to the formation of a unified English kingdom. And then religious influence. Alfred, I would argue, was a much more devout Christian. Charlemagne's was more of a convenience through his alliance with the Pope Leo III and the papacy. Alfred was a devoted Christian his entire life, and he supported the church and revitalized the monastic life in Wessex. His religious influence was more localized, but I would say much more sincere and impactful to the history of England. And then personality and dispositions. Charlemagne was known for his energetic and ambitious nature. He was a large figure, so Charlemagne was both physically towering and tall and a large man. And they both enjoyed hunting. One of the interesting things about St. Alfred the Great is it's remarked that he was the greatest hunter in all of the lands of Britain, or at least Wessex. I mean, how would they know all of Britain? But he was a renowned hunter. Alfred the Great loved to hunt. And so Alfred was more characterized by his scholarly and pious nature. So yeah, he won battles. He went to battle. He defeated the Danes and the Vikings. But Alfred was much more of an intellectual king. He was a pious king, and he was known for his wisdom, his modesty, and his determination. Despite suffering from poor health, he was a tenacious and resilient leader. And Alfred was very introspective. He was reflective. He valued education, moral integrity, and his leadership was marked by a deep sense of duty and responsibility to his people. And that leads me to the 5 things that I wrote down that I believe is important about King Alfred the Great. Is number 1, why is Alfred the Great great? And these are my personal opinions. I wrote down 5 that I would signify. Number 1, his piety. Alfred was a very pious Christian king, as we've said. He was incredibly moral, and he renewed the Christian faith within England, and he viewed his entire battle against the Vikings as one in which was his faith in Christ defeating the heathen pagans. And so his revitalization of monasticism, classical learning, and then wanted religious reform, so more of the faith could be understood within English. Number 2 was his bravery and courage. The Battle of Ashdown, as we looked, he rides out to battle with his men, even though he's dwarfed in numbers, waiting for his brother to come out of divine liturgy to aid him in battle, which he does. And of course, they defeat the Vikings at the Battle of Ashdown. So despite losses and victories, Alfred never backed down. No matter what defeat happened, he always regrouped, reorganized, and then counterattacked. Again, demonstrating his resiliency, his courage, and his bravery. And then number 3, I wrote down is his intelligence. Charlemagne never learned how to read, even though he was a great patron of the arts and learning that leads into the Carolingian Renaissance. Alfred didn't learn to read till he was 12, but he never, ever, ever stopped pursuing educational pursuits, and eventually, again, becoming somebody who was enamored with philosophy and theology. And then of course, he learns language so well that he's able to translate many different works into Old English. Charlemagne could have never done this. And I think it highlights the uniqueness and the skills that Alfred the Great actually had. Number 4 I have is the love of his people. Alfred loved his people, and he thought it was his religious duty to defend his people. I wrote down that Alfred saw it was his God-given duty to fight for his people against the Vikings. The idea of allowing, coming up with some treaty and living under Viking rule, never, ever part of the plan for Alfred, because he viewed it as his God-given destiny to fight off the heathen army, of which nobody in Britain was successful until him. And so his loyalty is what caused the men. Remember when he's hiding out in the marshes after his fleeing of Chippenham? It's him sending out those letters. It's him having the loyalty of his men because he was such an honest, pious king that men were willing to go to battle for him. And because of that, that's why they defeated the heathens at the Battle of Edington. And then my number 5 point of why Alfred the Great is great is his military foresight. He established a strong professional army. As we said, I would say close to 20,000. Now, maybe it's lesser. Again, this is a debated topic amongst historians. But the plan to build burhs, these fortified structures to fend off the Vikings, the creating and designing new ships, these were huge. And this was all foresight. This is during the 880s when Alfred already defeated the Vikings in 878. He knew that they were going to come and try it again. And he made a considerable effort to make sure that didn't happen. And his efforts held true, and that there was multiple incursions, but there was never another Viking success of taking the land like it was before. So those are my 5 points of why Alfred the Great is great: his piety, his bravery and courage, his intelligence, his love and devotion to his people, his willing to die for his faith and his people. And then number 5 is military foresight. So those are my top 5 points of Alfred the Great. Now, one of the things I also wanted to show you guys was Alfred the Great's prayer. So Alfred the Great, here it is right here, the King Alfred's prayer. So it's believed that this was a prayer that he actually came up with. And so he ruled, he himself translated books into Old English. At the time, the church in Europe was divided. So he was an Orthodox ruler over an Orthodox nation. He was a pious man and composed the following prayer, which was translated from the Old English by Archpriest George Lardus. And this This is his prayer right here. And I want to read it to you guys. So this is King Alfred's personal prayer that he wrote. Lord Almighty God, maker and ruler of all creation, I pray thee, by thy great mercy and by the sign of thy holy cross, by the Saint Mary's maidenhood and by Saint Michael's obedience, and by the love of all thy saints in their merits, that thou guide me better than I have wrought unto thee, and guide me to thy will and to my soul's good, better than I myself may know, and establish my mind in thy will and to my soul's good, and strengthen me against the devil's temptations, and remove from me the foul lust and all unrighteousness, and shield me against my adversaries, seen and unseen, and teach me thy will to work, that I may love thee fervently above all things, with a clean mind and with a clean body. For thou art my creator and my redeemer, my helper, my comfort, my trust, and my hope. To thee be praise and glory now and forever and ever unto the world without any end. Amen. Beautiful prayer. And it sounds very Orthodox, right? That sounds something like we would actually read out of one of our Orthodox prayer books. So we had a super chat. Shout out to King Attila for sponsoring today's stream. Really appreciate you, King Attila. Thank you so much, brother. He throws in $5, no comment, and then throws in another $2 and says, thank you for doing this stream on St. Alfred. Well, thank you for sponsoring, King Attila. Really appreciate the support. Thank you for sponsoring this stream. Again, King Alfred is near and dear to my heart. As an Orthodox Christian, I mean, personally, he's my favorite king. Why is King Alfred my favorite king? Because I have Anglo-Saxon ancestry, and it puts a historic saint, a historic man, a man to look up to within my Orthodox framework and my Orthodox faith. And so for that, I love King Alfred. Saint Alfred the Great, pray for us, please. And so, you know, one of the things that I thought doing the stream that is so sad is learning about King Alfred and everything that he did, and then seeing the state of England now. I mean, you talk about rolling over in your grave. King Alfred, everything that he did set the tone for a Christian England, for a pious Christian England. That was his desire. That was his goal. And he accomplished that. And through his son, Edward the Elder, and through his grandson, Ethelstan, it was accomplished. England became united for the first time in history. And to see England now, it's like everything's being reversed. I don't know if you guys feel this way. I'm sure most of you do. But it's so sad to watch what's happening in the UK. It's so sad to see it becoming Islamic. The British people losing their faith. It's one of the more atheistic countries in the world. And, you know, promoting the American degeneracy of LGBTQ and whatnot. And so it's like now everything that Alfred the Great fought for and accomplished, and the legacy and the history, it feels like it's being unwound. And that's so sad. That's so sad. You know, England is literally losing their history. They're losing their identity. And in fact, there's, you know, here in America, there is an institute of learning that was devoted to King Alfred the Great, and they erected a statue. And of course, the progressive educators of the institute don't like the statue. And in fact, they wanted it taken down. I don't know if they took it down, but it's because Alfred the Great represents the supremacy of white men. And so because of that, monuments dedicated to him, just like various other men of history, are being attacked by the progressive left because it reinforces white supremacy and white male hegemony and dominance over the world. And it's like, this man was a pious Christian man. This man did everything for his people. And we live in a world in which he's the enemy. It's unreal. It's unreal. Well, Emmanuel renewed his membership, been a COTEL crew member for 15 months, a year and 3 months. Thank you so much, Well Emmanuel. God bless you, brother. And he said, thanks. Well, thank you, Well Emmanuel, for your support. Really appreciate you, brother. And, you know, that kind of wraps up. I had so many more articles. I was going to read this one, but we covered so much of it. It's almost just repeating ourselves at this point. Maybe there's a few things that I'd like to read. Is there anything that you guys want me to cover that I haven't covered yet? Anybody out there? Alfred of New England said, the last remains of true Christianity are being stripped away in Britain. They know that the saints protect their lands and people, so they wage war against this. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, Brody says it's the logical conclusion of Rome to Anglican to modernity. It's, that's true too. Brody, shout out to Brody, throws in $2, says, are his relics known anywhere? And so unfortunately not. We knew of his burial, and then his body got moved, and then it got moved again. Actually, there's Wikipedia actually has a good section on it. Let me bring that up. Death and burial. So Alfred died, as we said, on October 26, 899, at the age of 50 or 51. How he died is unknown, but he suffered throughout his life with a painful and unpleasant illness. His biographer, Asser, gave a detailed description of Alfred's symptoms, and this has allowed modern doctors to provide possible diagnosis such as Crohn's disease or hemorrhoids. His grandson, King Edred, seems to have had a similar illness. Alfred was temporarily buried at Old Minster in Winchester with his wife, Elswith, who, again, I said is a saint. She was canonized. And later, his son, Edward the Elder, before his death, he had ordered the construction of the new minster, hoping that it would become a mausoleum for him and his family. 4 years after his death, the bodies of Alfred and his family were exhumed and moved to their new resting place in the new minster and remained there for 211 years. When William the Conqueror rose to the English throne after the Norman conquest in 1066, many Anglo-Saxon abbeys were demolished and replaced with Norman cathedrals. One of those unfortunate abbeys was the very new Minster Abbey, where Alfred was laid to rest. Before demolition, the monks of the new minster exhumed the bodies of Alfred and his family to safely transfer them to a new location. The minster monks moved to Hyde in 1110, a little north of the city, and they transferred the Hyde Abbey along with Alfred's body to those of his wife and children, which were interred before the high altar. In 1536, many Roman Catholic churches were vandalized by the people of England, spurred by disillusionment with the church during the dissolution of the monasteries. One such Catholic church was the site of Alfred's burial, Hyde Abbey. Once again, Alfred's place of rest was disturbed for the now third time. Hyde Abbey was dissolved in 1538 during the reign of Henry VIII. The church site was demolished and treated like a quarry, as the stones that made up the abbey were then reused in local architecture. The stone graves housing Alfred and his family stayed underground, and the land returned to farming. These graves remained intact until 788, when the site was acquired by the country for the construction of a town jail. Before construction begins, convicts that would later be imprisoned at the site were sent in to prepare the ground to ready it for building. While digging the foundation trenches, the convicts discovered the coffins of Alfred and his family. The local Catholic priest, Dr. Milner, recounts the event. The miscreants couch amidst the ashes of our Alfreds and Edwards, and where once religious silence and contemplation were only interrupted by the bell of regular observance, the chanting of devotion, now alone resound the clank of the captives' chains and the oaths of the profligate. In digging the foundation of that mournful edifice, at almost every stroke at the mattock or spade, some ancient sepulchre was violated, the venerable contents of which were treated with marked indignity. On this occasion, a great number of stone coffins were dug up, with a variety of other curious articles such as chalices, patens, rings, buckles, the leather of shoes and boots, velvet and gold lace belonging to chasubles and other vestments, and also the crook rims and joints of beautiful crozier double gilt. The convents broke the stone coffins into pieces. The lead, which lined the coffins, was sold for 2 guineas, and the bones were within scattered around the area. The prison was demolished between 846 and 850. Further excavations were inclusive, and in 866 and 897. In 866, amateur antiquarian John Meller claimed to have recovered a number of bones from the site, which he said were those of Alfred. These came into the possession of the vicar nearby of St. Bartholomew's Church, who reburied them in an unmarked grave in the church graveyard. Excavations conducted by the Winchester Museum Service at the Hyde Abbey site in 1999 located a second pit dug in front of where the high altar would have been located, which was identified probably dating at Meller's 1866 excavation. In 1999, archaeological excavation uncovered the foundations of the abbey's buildings, and some bones suggested at the time to be those of Alfred. They proved instead to belong to an elderly woman. In March 2013, the Diocese of Winchester exhumed the bones from the unmarked grave at St. Bartholomew's and placed them in a secure storage. The diocese made no claim that they were the bones of Alfred, but intended to serve them of later analysis and the attentions of the people of interest who had been sparked by the recent identification of the remains of Richard III. The bones were radiocarbon dated, but the results showed that they came from the 1300s and therefore not of Alfred. In January of 2014, a fragment of pelvis that has been unearthed in the 1999 excavation of the Hyde site and had subsequently lain in the Winchester Museum storeroom was radiocarbon dated to the correct period. It has been suggested that his bone may belong to either Alfred or his son Edward, but this remains unproven. So the question of, is there any relics left of King Alfred? Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no. And as you highlighted, it's the upheaval history. If you're familiar with like the English Civil War, the battle between the royalists and the parliamentarians, there wasn't much love for historic Christianity. And as you saw in that article, there wasn't much love for King Alfred. I'm sorry, I was actually reading this. I didn't even have it pulled up. Now, this is interesting on the legacy. Henry the 8th of England, or the 6th of England, attempted unsuccessfully to have Alfred canonized by Pope Eugene IV in 1441. The current Roman Martyrology does not mention Alfred. The Anglican Communion venerates him as a Christian hero with a lesser festival on the 26th of October. And he may be found depicted in stained glasses in churches of England, parish churches. In 2007, the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church canonized all saints of the British Isles, including King Alfred. He is honored during the Feast of All Saints of the British Isles on the third Sunday after Pentecost. And his feast on the 26th of October, there's an Orthodox mission named after St. Alfred in Middleburg, Florida. Now, this was interesting, right? Alfred was ranked the number 14th in BBC's list of the 100 greatest Britons. Now look at this. The 100 greatest Britons. Churchill, number 1. Princess Diana. Charles Darwin. Are you serious? William Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, Elizabeth I, John Lennon, Oliver Cromwell. All these men were voted by British people to be more important than King Alfred the Great. Kind of sad, really. It's a bit sad. It really is. So, unfortunately, our beloved St. Alfred the Great hasn't enjoyed the most memorable veneration, that's for sure. King Attila throws in another $2. He says, also, I don't know Old English. Sorry. Oh, okay. I thought you actually did. And then David Atlas renewed his membership. Thank you so much, David Atlas. He said, God bless y'all. Well, thank you, David. God bless you and your family. And King Attila said for $5, Pope Alexander II gave papal approval for William the Bastard to conquer Anglo-Saxon England to bring the autonomous churches under papal control. Exactly. So a bit of a sad historical veneration and recognition of St. Alfred the Great, unfortunately. One of the interesting things I want to show you is the stained glass depiction of the conversion of Guthrum. So right here, let's see it in just a second. There's a beautiful stained glass depicting here it is. So right here, if you guys can see this, let me make it a little bit longer. So this is a Victorian depiction. This is a stained glass window. This is a Victorian depiction of Guthrum, the Dane Viking, right, that he defeated. The Viking chief's baptism attended by King Alfred in a stained glass window at Blakeney, Norfolk. So, again, beautiful stained glass there. But let me share my links with all you guys. Is there anything else you want me to? I have more sources. I was going to cover some of his reforms and stuff, but we're over 2 hours, and I don't want to bore you guys with so much historical monotony. This is a really good article, though. Let me share this article with you guys in case any of you want to look at it again. Yeah, Alfred Newey says, "Look at that stash." Yeah, that's a serious Dane stash, Viking stash there. And then here is the Ortho Wiki article, which covers basically everything that we just described in today's stream. If you want to read the Ortho Wiki article on St. Alfred, you can see it with this link right here. And then again, if you want to look up Guthrum or the Great Heathen Army, you can do that yourself. The first video that we saw, which was an introduction, a historical overview, you can check that out here. And again, I'm a huge fan of History Marque. I don't know if you guys like watching battles and stuff like that. I personally love it. So there's that. And then here is the Old English song. If you guys want that, this is the Old English song of St. Alfred the Great. And this is the Christian hymn in English, modern day English, if you guys want that one. And then this was a really good, which one is this? This is Historic UK. This was a decent article. This is a really good one. This is from a website called orthodoxengland.org. I thought it'd be a little bit too boring if I just read this whole thing to you, but I read this in preparation for the stream. And if you would like to read it, you can check that out right here. It's really a good article, and it talks about how Orthodox St. Alfred was. I wanted to mention some of his translations. One of the things that I didn't get to, where was that? Was in Religion, Education, and Culture. Yeah. So he was equally comfortable distributing his translation. Oh, where'd my mouse go? Oh, crap. There it is. Distributing his translation of Gregory the Great's pastoral care to his bishops so that they might better train and supervise priests in using the same bishops as royal offices and judge. He also translated Boethius's, where is that? Let me see. Here he is. So the translation was undertaken under Alfred's command. Remarkably, Alfred, undoubtedly with the advice of his aide and his court scholars, translated 4 works himself: Gregory's Pastoral Care, Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, St. Augustine's Soliloquies, and the first 50 Psalms of the Psalter. All were personally translated by St. Alfred the Great from Latin into Old English for his Anglo-Saxon people to have better access to Christianity and some of the theology. One might add to this list the translation in Alfred's Law Code, the excerpts from the Vulgate Book of Exodus, the Old English versions of the Histories Against the Pagans, and Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People are no longer accepted by scholars as Alfred's own because of lexical and stylistic differences. Nonetheless, the consensus remains that they were part of the Alfredian program of translation. Again, highlighting how important the translation of this stuff was. Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy was the most popular philosophical handbook of the Middle Ages. Unlike the translation of the Pastoral Care, the Alfredian text deals very freely with the original, and though the late Dr. G. Shepis showed that many of the additions to the text are to be traced not to the translator himself, but to the glosses and commentaries which he used. There is still much in the work which is distinctive in the translation, has been taken to reflect philosophies of kingship in Alfred's milieu. It is in the Boethius that the oft-quoted sentence occurs: "I speak briefly, I desire to live worthily as long as I lived, and after my life to leave them that should come after my memory and good works." The book has come down to us in 2 manuscripts, and one of these, the writings in prose, the other a combination of prose and alternating writing. And then the Pope Gregory, we still have this manuscript, the original manuscript, and copies were still being made in the 11th century. And it's, I believe, the oldest, does it say here? One article I read that his translation of Pope Gregory's Great Pastoral Care is one of the oldest historical copies of written English. And we still have, it's at a museum somewhere in England, I believe in London. I'm not totally positive. Yeah, it doesn't say here. But anyways, it was interesting nonetheless. So those are a few. Then the Alfred Jewel, that's what this is right here. This was part of his renewal of the arts. So he brought in craftsmen from the continent of Europe to try to educate people within the Anglo-Saxon territory, specifically Wessex, to be able to create similar jewels. And so this is the Alfred Jewel. This is in Oxford. And this was commissioned personally by Alfred and probably a pointer to aid reading, but very beautiful and symbolizes the elevation of the arts and craftsmanship under St. Alfred. Oh, thank you so much. Brody Alexander throws in $10 and says, if you're interested, could you talk about who modern English people are ethnically? A mix of Picts, Britons, Celts, Romans, Vikings. Where did Anglo-Saxons come from and why? Yeah, well, yeah. So the modern English person is a mixture of, so Picts, Britons, those are all parts of the Celtic peoples. Romans, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, a lot of the Romans left England. And so it was mostly at that point just Celtic peoples and Celtic tribes, of which, again, the Britons and the Picts and the Celts of Ireland, these were all different Celtic groups, the Scots. But when you're talking about the ethnicity of contemporary English people, there's two major groups that you have to highlight. So the Vikings are one, and that comes through the Norman conquest. Okay, so you have the Anglo-Saxons come from, let's see, this video talked a little bit about it. The Anglo-Saxons come from here, northern Germany and parts of Denmark, this purple and orange area. And they wanted to conquer new lands. And so they went to England for those purposes and kind of easily defeated some of the Celtic peoples and began to establish their kingdoms, the heptarchy, as we talked about, the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms there. And so at that point, English, oh, I don't even have it pulled up. Here we go. The purple and orange right here, this is where the Anglo-Saxons come from. Northern Germany and parts of Denmark. This is why they're, so these are the Anglo-Saxons. They come there and then they establish the heptarchy, the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. So then English identity is a mixture of Celtic peoples. Welsh are Celtic people. That's what makes the Welsh unique, is they're the sort of, one of, along with the Irish and the Scots, one of the last remaining Celtic groups in Welsh is a unique Celtic language. We talked about that in the history of Celtic peoples. But at this point, it was a mixture of like Celtic peoples and Anglo-Saxons. With the Norman conquest of William the Conqueror in 1066, English identity is a mixture of Viking blood. So the Normans, the Norsemen, come from Norway and they conquer a section of northern England. Northern France, right around this area here. And so the Normans then eventually conquer. So English identity is a mixture of Anglo-Saxons, of Celts, of the Vikings, and of course of French. If you're familiar with the history of English monarchy, it's a mixture of German, French blood with Vikings, Anglo-Saxons or Germanic, and the Celtic people. So English identity is a mixture of all these different groups, Logan Daly says, Celt Stream made my mouth. No regrets on that sponsorship. Oh, made my month. Well, thank you very much, Logan. I'm glad that you liked that one. Yeah, King Attila said the Celtic stream was sick. Yeah, and the same with the St. Patrick's stream. I thought that all kind of aligns with the same stuff. So King Attila said a great stream would be ancient Irish monasticism. Yeah, that might be difficult to gather all the resources for, but if somebody wanted to sponsor that, maybe I'd dive into it. So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this stream. Again, Alfred the Great, he is a great man. Let me just double check all the super chats real quick before we hop off here. Shout out to Blue Skittle throws in $5, no comment. Thank you very much, Blue Skittle. God bless you, brother. And over on the Streamlabs, we just have Alfred of New England. And again, thank you all for the memberships and the support today. To conclude, Alfred the Great is a great man, and he's a great man, and he's a great king in multiple ways. His piety, his bravery and courage, his intelligence, and his desire to constantly learn and grow. You know, one of the interesting things I found is that Alfred believed that the more, coming from a Christian perspective, right? So you had to be a baptized Christian, but he believed that the more uneducated or more illiterate you were, it could cause you to become a more immoral person because you didn't have the sort of logical categories, the ability to critically think and reason. And so he felt his educational reforms and his religious reforms in England, what would become England, was essential to creating a more moral populace, and that with their Christian faith and tying learning and their vernacular language back into the Christian church, he thought this would create a more moral and more pious society, which he thought is the only way that a group of people sort of live throughout history. How an empire, he believed that as long as you had moral and pious people that were devoted to Christ and the church, that Christ would protect the church and he would protect those people. And as they fell away from Christ, he believed that Christ would then show wrath and those people would lose what they had. And that almost seems prophetic. Now that we look at modern England, the loss of the faith, the loss of morality, the loss of piety, the loss of the identity and their ancestry, they are losing everything that they were given. And so, again, Alfred the Great, his intelligence, his love for his people, his military reforms, educational reforms, religious reforms. He was a great king. He's my favorite king. He's one of my favorite Orthodox saints because of his Anglo-Saxon ancestry. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this stream. I hope it was educational. Smash that like. And I will be back tomorrow. I have a stream with with Conrad and Dimitri of World War Now. We'll be diving into World War III, Orthodox Christianity, and geopolitics. And I'll be live Saturday morning with Dr. Michael Moeller to discuss finding God in the West. And this is going to be a series of streams we're going to do on Saturday mornings and talking about the problems with Western Christianity, the New Age, spiritual not religious, Catholicism, evangelical and modern Protestantism. And so this is going to be a recurring series that we're going to do. So I hope you guys are able to make it Saturday morning. But tomorrow at 5:00 p.m., I'll be joined by the gentleman from World War Now to really dive into stuff. So that should be pretty good. But again, thank you very much to King Attila for sponsoring today's stream. I really appreciate your support. And anyways, guys, thank you so much. God bless you all. I love you. Thank you very much. Major shout out to everybody. Austin DeTulio, Logan Daly, Amptown 1, Mud, King Attila, Well Emmanuel, David Atlas, Brody Alexander, Alfred of New England, Blue Skittle, and Justin Henley. Thank you all so very much for your support. God bless you, and I will see you tomorrow. As always, until next time, God bless.